Welcome to the Intersecting Us podcast, where math and life intersect.
In today's episode, Brian and Dave explore the patterns of creation, from music to the universe. Brian and Dave begin their discussion with math, music, and movies, unraveling the threads of universal language.
Hello. Today on the podcast, we're going to continue in with, I guess the big concept is kind of look at eternity and infinity, but we're kind of drilling down a little bit more. If you listen to our last podcast, which you're welcome to go back and listen to before this one if you want to, we looked at different ways. Really, it came down to music eventually and how that works and how the math behind that works. But one of the key parts of that was looking into how math relates to the creation of things to make the beautiful music. So I don't know, Dave, could you maybe just give us a quick summary of that and how the creating something and the math that went with it made something that brings, I guess, as we'll say, beautiful music?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brian. You know, we're all about intersecting us, and this topic that we're talking about here, pentatonic chimes and beautiful music, makes it extremely easy to intersect us, because one of the things I get super excited about in math is that it's timeless. And so who is us in math? Well, I could speak to someone who is from a completely different country, continent, language, and we would all be talking about the same thing when it comes to math. In fact, we can go back through history and think about what people like Euclid and those people talked about from the Greek culture 2,000 years ago. And it's the same thing. It's timeless. I was talking to a friend and they said if an alien came to Earth, the only way we'd be able to communicate is with math. And so I love intersecting us through math. But then today we're talking about music and the chimes, and the pentatonic chimes is a universal sound that is considered beautiful for all people across cultures, across time. And so what is it that allows us to hear this thing? This is kind of like Brian's thing. I'm really looking forward to what Brian's going to do to help us think about this universal beauty that is out there in sound that we get from five simple pentatonic chimes.
And it does segue so well. As you were talking, in my mind, when we started this podcast, I'd kind of thought of one particular movie as kind of a good segue because it's got science and math in it and really purpose and meaning. But then another one, kind of came to mind too. But I think we'll at least do the one. The one I was thinking of is a movie called Contact. Jodie Foster was in it. I don't know how many years ago that was, but the whole idea was that it was the SETI. She was a scientist with SETI, which is Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which I do think exists. But it's, they get these big radioscopes that are trying to get data and find patterns. Well, in this movie, to make it kind of, and have you seen the movie, Dave? I don't know if
I have not. No, although I've kind of heard about it a little bit, but very little.
Matthew McConaughey was in it too. He was actually, ironically, a pastor in that, which is kind of interesting. It's I thought it was a well done movie, but it's a whole idea, and it's got her relationship with her dad who had passed away and everything. So there's a lot of cool parts about it. But anyway, and there's a lot of experiential things, and I'll let you watch the movie. I don't know if it's on Prime or Netflix or whatever, but I assume you can get it somehow. It's probably a couple decades old. But the point here is what they decided, and you just said that, was that they made contact. So there was these patterns. They're like somebody's out there. We found somebody. Well, how do we talk to them? We don't want to make it sound like we want to kill them and all that. You want to be friendly. But what they ended up, somewhat long story short, they used math and equations and stuff. And so I encourage you to watch that movie. But the other one that came to mind, and it just came to, this was one when I was growing up, and Dave, we're about the same age, so you might remember this. And I'm going to try to do this, and it might not be very good, but it was do, 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 do. I don't know if anybody remembers that. But that was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And when they had that, the spaceship came down, they were trying to communicate, and it was eventually those notes. And then they came back,
Wow.
I think Richard Dreyfuss and some of it. But that's another one. That's an old one. That's even older than Contact by quite a bit. But again, here we have, obviously it's just a movie, but I'm sure they had scientists and mathematicians and magicians and everything, kind of as consultants. And that's what they came up with, it's fictional, but it makes sense that this has already kind of been thought of, that the universal language is math. And you don't have to comment on this if nothing comes to mind, Dave, but if you do think about, are those different? Is it completely different? Well, you got math over here and you got music over here. Or are those related?
Well, obviously math is underlying music, but I've got this question. I just got to ask you, Brian, before I answer your question, because it's just on the front of my mind and it's not going away. Did you think about those movies before we started this podcast, or did you just happen to think about them when I talked about aliens?
Yeah, actually, you had brought that up a podcast or two ago. So that's when the Contact movie came. And
okay.
And so that one, but it was just really when you were talking right now about the music and the math, I'm like,
well, I knew
right now. Yeah.
I knew one or two things happened. Either I got incredibly lucky by using an analogy that you were ready to talk about, or you're lightning fast and I talk about aliens and all of a sudden see the connection and have two movies in mind. So it looks like it was the latter and not the former. But anyway, I was very curious as to where your brain was at on that. So now back to
it was right there. I think that's the thing. And this is a complete tangent, and we're trying to keep most of our podcasts. If you're a follower, or if you're just coming on the first time, we try to keep them around a half hour if we can. So, we certainly can go off and talk about things, and hopefully they're important to you too. But just the idea of movies, I mean, we might want to think about doing it just the way, because it's art. It's the art of the day. Not that paintings and music aren't there, but it's just that way it captures culture and what people are thinking. And so we see that a lot of things. I know when my kids were growing up. Right now, there's a couple other movies, that we just have these lines from the movie that we know. But if you're outsider, you're thinking we're nuts. Maybe for other reasons, but for that reason too. One of them's The Princess Bride and one of them's Three Amigos. And you can watch those if you want. They're both kind of cute movies. I guess my whole point there is the language. You can say a phrase, like if I ask you, I don't know if anybody has anything, if they're in your car, you're listening and you have a number of something, like say you have a number of quarters in your car. I could ask you, do you have a plethora of quarters? Now, plethora is a word that you may or may, the only reason I know that movie is from word is from the movie Three Amigos. I mean, and if you watch the movie, you're thinking piñatas and you're thinking, but if you haven't, but again, it's back to the language. You're speaking a language that it's English, but it's got something deeper in it. And I think that's what we're talking about with math and with music. And of course, with intersecting us with life.
Right. Yeah. So to answer your question, is that you talk about language and math and beauty. A lot of people think math is a study of numbers, that really the underlying part is numbers. And that really is not the underlying part. We get to numbers, but below numbers is math is just a language of being able to articulate patterns. And so you need to understand patterns. And babies can do that from a really young age. As humans, we recognize and respond to patterns almost right out of the womb, even though we have no idea what the number 1 or 2 is. But they've done some really interesting studies, and babies can recognize patterns. And so we're talking about aliens and whatnot. I think the universality of it all, if that's a word, is that there is this recognition of patterns. And, we may use different words like 1 or 2, but we all have an idea of a concept of oneness and two-ness. And so I think that's where that underlying intersection occurs, is that there's patterns. And then what you and I get excited about is that not only are there patterns out there, but there's some really cool ones to think about. And there's tremendous implication of what those cool patterns mean and can mean to our lives.
Well, and I think you come into, when you look at patterns, and the way we're looking at things when it's math, whether it's formulas or equations, they can become so mundane. And that's kind of what we're about, is trying to make it less mundane, not by smoke and mirrors, by just looking at it more deeply and seeing, like you said, patterns. But it really comes down to purpose and meaning too. When you look at these things, for instance, you go to I've been to one symphony. I want to go to more, but there's certain music I listen to that. Well, why do you listen to it? Is it just I'm looking, and I know you didn't say that, but are you just looking for patterns, or there's an emotional thing about it? It brings back memories. It allows us to think about the future. Certainly relationships go into that, feelings, it's just, there's something deeper about it. But at the core of it is there are patterns, whether it's mathematical patterns or counting patterns or all those types of things. And when we look at the math of things, and when we're looking at the patterns, a couple podcasts ago, we talked about the universe, going even deeper, because we're talking about in a bigger picture, and in both podcasts and the videos that we're going to be coming out on the website, eternity, infinity. And we did talk about the universe starting to exist. And so it's not past eternal. And that's something we really discussed a little bit about, and how not only that it's true scientifically and mathematically, but, even how does it make you feel that it had a beginning. And then we talked about our own beginning.
Brian and Dave discuss math and metaphysics, seeking meaning in numbers and the universe.
Today, we want to talk a little bit about segueing from the patterns and the intelligence and the math and the language, is when we have a universe that we know began. And, this, when you listen to this may be controversial to people. It may not. We're not really going to try to land any planes. We're just going to ask questions, which is what we do here for the most part. And a lot of times our answers will just be better questions. But does it make sense to exclude the possibility of something starting this, since it did start? And I guess I'll ask that. I mean, that's kind of a philosophical question, I know, but and you can just have a one-word answer if you want, Dave. But does it make sense to exclude that? Say, well, no, we just can't have something that started that. Any thoughts there, Dave?
Well, I'm always nervous when we exclude something, because, and from a math perspective, if you say, I know this is not true, not possible, that could be true, but I know the burden's on me to do an awful lot of proving to arrive at that. So I prefer to usually start with what are the possibilities before I start eliminating them.
Yeah, you almost sound like Sherlock Holmes there a little bit. I don't know if it was him, or I know he said this, but where it's, trying to prove a universal negative is almost impossible, because it kind of goes back to infinity. Do you've tested every possible hypothesis, and that's why it's always hard. So what we're trying to do, and I think philosophically what you try to do, we're talking about origins, universal origins here, the whole universe, matter. Does it make sense to exclude, as a presupposition, the possibility of some things starting it? And we can go on for eternity on trying to figure out what that something is. I think everybody would say no. Now, there may be people who have tried all kinds of ways to see what that something is, and it just came to the conclusion that it's just most likely not something that's true. Okay, that's fine. But for our purposes today on our podcast, at least think about that, because as we look at our own lives, and that's what I think you always want to kind of zero in microscopically on your own life, and then get the telescope back out and come back into the big picture. We each person at least want to, and just because you want something doesn't make it true, you want to believe that your life matters. I think everybody wants that. In fact, you look at, and I've dealt with that sometimes, and I don't want to get too morbid here, but people who struggle with their life, and maybe to the point of thinking it's not worth continuing, usually because they don't see any purpose. People that have meaning and purpose in their life don't they may struggle, but they don't struggle with that, because they know that their life has meaning. Now, we can philosophically create the meaning in our life, which is fine. We do that in different ways. But also, should we be discovering that? And then you go back into the universe, go back to that. We talked about the singularity, and, that's more science than I completely understand, but I can say the terms to sound smart anyway. You've got something became there and something went bang. I think everybody scientifically agrees with that. So when you go back, what's the purpose of that? Why? What science deals with is what? Mm-hmm. And math a lot. But what philosophy deals with is why.
Right. And I encourage everyone to watch our video on the chimes. We brought two guests on there, Paul and Carolyn, and they talked about, Paul did primarily about the chimes. And the cool thing about it is that Paul he's a music specialist. He teaches music for a living. And he talked about what the pentatonic chimes does is it brings release to tension. And he said, like, Brian, you talked about a symphony, why you go there, you want meaning. And the people that know how to engineer good music, what they will do is create tension and suspense through different notes. And then they will release it, and that you will feel the releasing of that tension. And so what I'm taking from this, from what Paul said, is that, you think about the aliens, it's like there is this message given to us through the pentatonic chimes that is universal. It's understood by all cultures, according to Paul, and all time. It's a rhythm that we all understand, and it's a rhythm of release. And so it's almost like the chimes are giving us this secret code of saying, it's okay. You are okay. You can relax. And to be able to hear that and know that this did not come from any human being, but it has been given to us as a gift that we have discovered and experienced I think is pretty cool. And at least that was what motivated me to say, hey, let's do a video about that, was answering that question that you talked about. What gives us meaning? What gives us purpose? And what gives us hope? And this may be a small thing, but a small thing from a powerful voice, for me, has tremendous impact.
Well, and again, you're seeing that there's meaning there. You're not going to tell someone, well, you can tell them, but you're not going to convince someone that, if they really like classical music, or they really like country music, or they like hip hop, or, whatever. I like 80s music and soft rock and stuff, and listen in some smooth jazz. You're not going to tell me, well, that doesn't have any meaning. You don't feel anything when you listen to that. Yeah, I do. I mean, and you may not, and that's fine. But that doesn't mean there's not meaning there. But that's what it was created for. The pentatonic chimes were created to have a particular, I guess I would say, soothing sound. I mean, I to just be blunt, I don't know, you get those, and I don't know why people give these as gifts, but they'll give these just general chimes. You get like a Hobby Lobby or something, which is fine. I'm not trying to get the chime people mad at me or anything, but but the idea, and they're just kind of put together. And I'm not saying they're not created, but they're just to make some noise. And you hear those and they're like, hey, they're okay. But then, especially if you're trying to sleep and you hear them, you wish somebody to take them down. You're just not liking that. But the pentatonic ones, they're soothing, it's just, they created to be soothing.
Uh-huh.
They were, and that's kind of the way we look at it. And you'll see that in the videos, when everything, it seems to me, and it's just as hard to probably prove a universal positive as a universal negative. So when I use the term everything, it's a little bit, with a little bit conjecture there. But the idea, everything that we know in our experience, and even in historical experience, that has been created for a purpose. Whatever you make, whether it's something that's conceptual math where you're doing formulas and equations to be able to accomplish things, There's a purpose to it all. And the chime, there's a purpose. You create them at different lengths because you want the purpose of And so when you back this up, like we've been trying to do, to the universe itself that began to exist, that one everybody shakes hands on. It's not, did it begin to exist? We know that we're fairly certain of that from science and math, and observability. That's not in question, but how it got there. And then why it's there is, how is a very interesting question. And then why is maybe even more important. And because I think those come together, how and why. How do you make chimes sound the way you do? And why are you trying to make them that way? They're intertwined. If you know how, usually you can figure out purpose, and meaning. If you don't know how, it's a little harder. And, most scientists, mathematicians, and I think even philosophers, we're not going to just say, well, it was just dumb luck. That might work for a few things, but most of the time, if that's true, why are we scientists, mathematicians, philosophers? Because it's just luck, right? Why even talk about it? Because it's just chance. I don't think that works for everything. And so if you back it up that far, you get to the, 14 billion years ago. That's what I ask, we're doing it now. At least entertain the possibility, and this becomes a theological question also, certainly, because, and we don't want to use the God word, but obviously that would be an option, and we're not talking about any particular God. We're talking about some thing at first that did this, but it doesn't, because we're talking about everything that starts physical matter. Would it not logically, if it is something that starts that, it can't be physical, because that's illogical, right?
Right.
If it's creating everything that is physical, it has to start out being non-physical. And now this is the term you get, and it's variously defined, but it's a fun term to know, is the term metaphysical, beyond the physical. That metaphysics it's about reality mainly, but it's about, sometimes a portion of metaphysics is about what's not physical. And so then you even have to posit, is it even real? Is non-physical things real? I'm going to go on the assumption, and you have to do this, right? Mathematically, scientifically, you have to go on the assumption. This first of all, an assumption that it is. And then how would that work? And then if you can't find a way that it works, then maybe you can go back and say, my hypothesis is wrong. It's not. There is nothing non-physical. And that's a big philosophical question in science, life, our culture. Unfortunately, it seems to me, and hopefully, in a very small way, Dave, you and I's conversations, our videos, our interaction with other people, maybe we can talk about this stuff without getting mad at each other in the first 5 minutes.
Yep. And I think that's really well said, Brian. And, for me, I kind of look at it not nearly as sophisticated as you do, because this is your sweet spot. I just kind of think about, is life random or not? Because if everything is random, then as you say, there really is no meaning to it. And I lose motivation to do what I do. But if I find that there's meaning there, that there's purpose, then that changes the story. And so I think that if, our first 3 videos, we looked at the number of hours in the sunlight, that's something we can see, and there's a pattern to it. And it's a beautiful pattern. And then our second video, we talked about the number E, and that is like an abstract number that's out there, not in the physical world, but has incredible properties that makes you wonder, like, who engineered this number? Where did it come from? It does not seem like a random possibility. And then in this third one is like chimes. How did these notes come together to make beautiful music that is so universal? Again, it just challenges the notion that everything is random and that there's no pattern or purpose.
Well, and the non-randomness is, we use that all the time. And, and I understand, we do. It can't work. You can't have GPSs and satellites and, pretty much anything if you just, we're just going to randomly throw things up there and hope. Well, obviously, that's what math and science does, and even philosophy to some extent, and even theology, patterns and repeatable. ordered. Was it? I think it was Einstein. I might be quoting this a little bit wrong. I think it's right. The most unbelievable thing about the universe is it's understandable. And it has order, and that was something that he thought was beautiful. In that set, because when you go back to the beginning of physical time, I'll use that word. The 14 billion years that we're pretty sure, because we can extrapolate back in a number of ways. If you go back to that, how much difference does it make whether that was just by chance or just, came out of nothing, or however we want to put that? And I'm not going to be pejorative against that. I mean, people have their reasons for that. That's fine. But whether it's compelling to someone or not, if you go back, does it make a difference whether this was something that was just kind of a force, back to another movie, or was it more of a person or a being that made a choice to do it? I think if you ask that question, let me ask it a little bit more succinctly. Does it make a difference if there was a person with purpose, meaning, and choices created the universe or not? And I think everybody would have to say, well, yeah, it makes a difference. Whether or not it makes a difference. Now, whether we'll ever be able to find out that, people say we might not, but part of the, back to kind of Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. That's a pretty important question, I think, to get your mind around. Even if you don't come to the conclusions shortly, boy, if we could figure that out, things could be different. And if anybody says, I don't care, I don't think they're honest. I mean, I guess that's a little pejorative, but really you don't care. And I might not care right now if I'm trying to do something else. But if you really step back, and where does that hit? And we've talked about that. It hits when part of our world gets rocked for whatever reason, whether it's a world event that shocks us, or a personal event that shocks us. And unfortunately, for the most part, this is usually negative things. We usually don't think about our existence so much when we just won the lottery and, we just passed our actuarial exam, or that girl says she likes me, or whatever it is. We don't do that. It's when someone we love gets sick, when a place we see as secure, something evil happens. That's when we start thinking about meaning, purpose, and value. And it does make a difference whether or not this got started by someone or nothing. It makes a difference, right? And our hope here at Intersecting Us is to talk about these things in ways that's respectful to each other. And we're certainly trying to find, I don't think they mean ultimate answers, but we're trying to get better questions and not just keep asking questions, because that drives people nuts. It's like a 3-year-old, right? Why are you driving the car? Because why? And they just go, why? It's just like they never are satisfied. Well, you got to get satisfied eventually, at least in some respects. So, and tying this into, the math side of things, it's really not that hard, because the reason we know that we had a beginning universally is because of science, which obviously uses math or it wouldn't work, and logic, which gets us into a whole lot of metaphysical questions that we're not going to take time for today. But we will. I like doing this, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but I like throwing these questions out. They're somewhat rhetorical, but you think about those things. Does it make a difference? We always had that about whether someone created the universe for purpose. Does it make a difference whether you in your own life have to create your own meaning, or there is meaning out there already that you can discover, like math has in its discoverability? How does that make a difference in my everyday life? I think it makes all the difference in the world. And then if if creation is done for a purpose, if you can figure a little bit of that out, then you start going down the primrose path of meaning, bringing beauty and joy and contentment. And I don't know anybody that doesn't want that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I've gone through different periods of my life where I am, extremely focused on that my life is purposeful. And that's the time when I feel most alive. And that doesn't necessarily mean things are going easy or things are going well. It's just that I really sense the purpose for what I'm doing, that there is a purpose and I'm clear on it. The part that I struggle mostly with is not the difficult times, but it's the times when I struggle with purpose. And so if you're a person that can relate to that and maybe you want to grow in your purpose for living and you see that that maybe is a muscle that needs to be stretched, well, that's the muscle we're going to be working on. One of the muscles that we're working on here that just happens to come out through math.
And I think you just keep getting deeper and deeper. I said that maybe in the first podcast. You're never going to exhaust your mind's ability to get into these relationships with people, but just the way we keep going, that's the way it looks like we're designed. It's just inexhaustible back to the eternity. You're just never going to exhaust this stuff. So you keep trying to get more meaning. And boy, just thinking about maybe there's stuff out there that already has meaning. We just have to discover it to get the joy. That's a pretty cool thing to think about. Now, just to kind of sum up here, we'll continue with the Chimes. We do have videos out there on intersectingus.com. And also at that website, you can sign up on Discord and you can ask questions and we'll interact with you that way. We'd like to get some feedback from the podcast and certainly from some of the questions we asked. But maybe I'll just leave you with this for our podcast today is, when you think about your own life, whether you're a math person or not, where your purpose is and what makes you content and what gives you joy, I think we all agree is something that we want to do. Find ways to do that. And we're hoping that maybe our podcast videos and website are a way to at least give you a little bit of that and think about things a little bit deeper, because having joy in life with the people we're around and the things we can do is probably the most important thing that we can have in life. And if Intersecting Us as an organization can help you a little bit with that, then we have reached one of our purposes, I guess, of trying to do that. So this is Dave and Brian. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having some more deep questions about math and life and how they intersect.
This has been the Intersecting Us podcast. To further engage with Intersecting Us, go to intersectingus.com.